Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Dr. Primrose as ZJB. My post content about academics, career and adulting. Today's theme is of course cross-cutting because by reflecting on what I wish I knew before pursuing my academic goals, I'm going to be speaking as an adult, reflecting and also thinking about my career decisions. I hope that this is one that resonates with some of you. I hope that this is one that some of you will take away lessons from. And I want to urge you to not shy away from adding via the comment section questions or any contributions that you think can be added to what I will be speaking about in this episode. I have 10 questions that will guide me, so I'll be looking down at my laptop from time to time so that I can give you comprehensive responses to the questions. Okay, so question number one is, why did you decide to pursue an academic career and what motivated you to choose this path? Foremost, it's very easy to answer this question. From the tender age of 15, when other young girls are dreaming of their wedding day, walking down the aisle in a white gown, dreaming of the day that their bride price will be paid and whatnot, I was busy fantasizing about my PhD graduation day. So this started a long time ago. By the time I got my PhD at the age of 28, it was something that I had been working towards. It was something that I had been yearning for. It was something that I knew if I never attained, I would really die a disappointed woman. So I also loved learning. I loved writing. I loved engaging in critical intellectual conversations. And I love sharing knowledge. And I wanted to do research and write independently, have my name on books, have my name on articles, speak at prestigious conferences and workshops and whatnot. So I don't know where I saw this because, to be quite honest, when I was 15, I had never watched a movie about a lecturer or anything. So to be quite honest, I can say that it's something that God just planted in me. And then question number two is, what were your expectations when you started your academic journey and how did they compare to the reality of academia? So I think personally, I would say that I started really pursuing the idea of becoming an academic around 2018. So I had completed my master's in 2016, waited for my results. They came out in 2017. And because I had attained the high grades that I required to pursue a PhD, the next thing was just to look for funding. Now, I also knew that I wanted to finish my PhD within the 3 funded years when I then got funding from the University of Cape Town. And I wanted to make sure that after my PhD, I would actually leave academia, which is very interesting. So I wanted to be a thought leader and a knowledge producer, but working within institutions such as the United Nations, because they do have sections that specialize in research. However, while I was waiting for my PhD thesis to be marked, I stumbled upon an email. It said something about a postdoctoral fellowship. I applied, and after some months, I got accepted. So that's when I fell into this, what I call the postdoc trap. Postdoc literally means that, you are staying on at the university as a research fellow or a teaching fellow, and you've done your PhD, you've completed it, you've passed it. So that's how I ended up just staying on in academia, right? This also happened due to the situation at the time. I finished my PhD at the beginning of 2021, so I submitted in February 2021. COVID-19 was still with us. We still had many lockdown restrictions, and I had done the final year of my PhD in hard lockdown conditions. So it was an opportunity that was very close, right? Doing a postdoc within the university. And also I needed the money because I was trying to prevent post-PhD poverty. Not saying that being a postdoc makes me rich, no ways. And also there was this false promise that if you actually do a postdoc, it's an easier path to one day becoming a full-time lecturer, what we usually call full tenure track positions. But that is not the case. I have been shocked coming across people that have been postdocs for up to 6 years in some institutions. So real academia is actually very ugly and it's hard to get into. So the reality and my expectations don't match. I'm not an esteemed researcher. I'm called an early career researcher, and I think I'm going to be an early career researcher for about 10 more years, um, depending on which spaces I'm in, right? Because if I stay in academia and I'm a postdoc, only when I become a lecturer or senior lecturer will I be eligible to be elevated, for example, to professor status. In particular, if I publish whatever is required as the bare minimum to become a professor by the institution that I'll be working with at the time. So I realized that in academia, some people don't even need PhDs to teach, even in the social sciences where I'm situated. Some people are lecturers because of the connections that they have. Some are lecturers because of the work experience they had before joining academia. Some people have strong networks through their family members or through fellow academics. So it is very difficult. Something else I didn't know was that academia is highly exploitative. When you're doing your postgraduate studies like honors and masters, they encourage you to teach, encourage you to become a teaching assistant, and you feel like, yes, you've made it in life because you are busy imparting knowledge to younger people in academia. You're busy working with fellow tutors and teaching assistants, but you're busy being underpaid. And for the longest time, because you're thinking that you are committing to your career trajectory, that you are growing as an academic, as a thought leader, you are learning and contributing and also showing what you're capable of so that one day people can pick your CV and say she can lecture. Academia can be very exploitative, right? Foremost, because they're going to be underpaying you. And secondly, because they rely on people being super passionate and hopeful in a future that is actually uncertain. And so my expectations did not match reality. Post PhD, it's almost 2 years now, and I am in this postdoc trap. Of course, I do think that it is my responsibility to lift myself out of it by trying to get jobs outside academia. So it is something that I'm actually pursuing very strongly. And I've come to tell myself to say, being an academic shouldn't necessarily be about you being situated within an academy that is a university or an institution that is defined as like an academic institution. I will always be an academic for life, but I just need to make sure that I take care of myself, that I'm not exploited and underpaid, and that I'm not staying in a position hoping that one day I'll be picked on when in actual fact that may never happen. All right. So question number 3 is, what are some of the common misconceptions or myths about academia that you encountered along the way? I think that there's this common perception that academia pays well. Personally, I still think that academia pays well. So mostly it's because I've seen the salaries of academics being advertised alongside job adverts, but I think that really happens within other sectors, right? It's only when you meet people or when you engage in some conversations where you realize that people outside academia actually get paid a lot more, right? Depending, of course, on where they are working. So what I do know, though, is that when you're in academia, particularly if you're a permanent staff member, then you know that in the long term, you are going to have a stable financial life. You can plan, you can get loans, you can build, you can buy properties and whatnot. And because you also get holidays at least once a year and the opportunity to take what they call sabbaticals, you can actually enjoy your money during those times. Although, of course, it depends on your lifestyle and other demands that come with being who you are. Yeah. So I also, I thought academia was mostly about teaching, right? When I think an academic, I think a lecturer, I think a teacher. But they don't tell you that academia is mostly about research outputs. That's why some of us got shocked in undergrad when you had these lecturers who didn't know how to teach, didn't know how to impart their knowledge, but somehow knew how to write well. Well, universities need them. Universities want them because university rankings, let me give an example, like the University of Cape Town. It's the best research university on the African continent and one of the leading research institutions across the world. So if they don't have academics who have strong publication records, then it means that they might actually go down in terms of their academic credibility. So I came to realize that as much as I love teaching, right, and reading, I had to put more effort into writing and doing research. And when you're done with your PhD, you are quite exhausted. So literally, you need to be ready to research for life. So this is where the 15-year-old in me who loved reading and writing and thinking and speaking had no idea that I had to spend so much more time engaging with theory and concepts and now thinking about doing research and like fusing all of those components. Another misconception I had about academia was that, you know what? That when you are an academic, you are well supported and well loved. Universities, like some other organizations, don't have good support structures or systems in place for people that work, particularly in teaching and research and in academia. They over rely on you being passionate. They over rely on you trying to put up a good front in front of students. They over rely on you wanting to have a job for life or whether temporarily, right? Because you need the money. But in many ways, you end up having to find ways of tending to yourself and taking care of yourself. And sometimes you only realize it at the point of burnout, or you only realize it, for example, nowadays, people online are speaking about therapy, people are speaking about various coping mechanisms that they indulge in that are healthy and are good for your sanity and good for your health in the short as well as the long run. So academia really, they don't care about us. Number 4, can you share some challenges you have faced in your academic career and how you overcame them? So I think personally, I struggled with the fact that obviously when I started, I experienced the slump from being an A student in high school to starting off with like 60s in terms of like percentage, in terms of most of my assignments, and trying to rise up to start getting first class passes, which only started at about 75%. And so within the first year of my studies, I made sure that I found mentors. Those were provided by the faculty, by the way. So it was a matter of just signing up and saying I need one. And we were also encouraged to attend what we called extra tutorials, particularly for politics subjects where I was struggling more. The project was called Pol Plus. And also, I really engaged with the feedback that I got on my assignments. Thank goodness my tutors were actually good enough to actually give me feedback on assignments, right? And I also made sure that I got my work checked by other people who were better and more intelligent than me. This was, of course, more often than not at the expense of them laughing at my work or ridiculing me or thinking that I was dumb. But I didn't care because I knew that at the end of the day, whatever they said could actually help me. I also try to make sure that I would read and write more often so that I could just make sure that I'm sharpening my brain and preparing it for more rigorous academic work. And I also did my best to listen to experts, how they spoke, how they framed questions, how they responded to questions, and also the insights that they always added from non-academic work, right? I'm in politics, I'm in international relations, I'm in gender studies. Those are areas that have contemporary issues that are happening, contemporary debates that people are engaging in. So just making sure I'm listening to the news, I'm watching documentaries, I'm following experts. What are they tweeting? I'm looking up experts who post on their blogs or their websites and whatnot. So it was a process of continuous learning to ensure that the challenges I was facing as an academic and a thinker could be mitigated by nourishing myself with what experts were doing. And also, I think that doing postgraduate studies is very helpful. Once you get to honors or masters within the South African context in particular, I found that the seminars we attended were more rigorous and helpful compared to the undergraduate lectures where there was like 300 of us in a class, but now there will be like 20 of us engaging critically with the lecturer, and most of our content will start off by looking at the theory, key concepts, and then moving down to case studies. Whereas when we're doing our undergraduate studies, I think that a lot of stuff was brushed over and they were trying as much as possible to not confuse us because, of course, when you're an undergrad, you are struggling. All right. So number 5 says, what do you wish you had known about the academic job market and process of finding a faculty position? To be quite honest, I wish I had known about the high levels of uncertainty. I should say, though, that when I was in the process of quitting my job as a foreign affairs officer, right? I was doing policy research in that department. I did have someone who had the wisdom and the knowledge and the experience and age who told me about how people struggle to find work in academia. So, as I was deciding to leave work for PhD, they gave me this as a piece of knowledge to take away with. And so, I think in hindsight, I would have stayed longer at work and pursued my PhD later in life on a self funded basis. However, we need to put things into context. When I finished my master's, I was working different types of jobs, and these were all on an ad hoc basis. So basically, I was a freelance researcher. I was struggling to find PhD funding. I was struggling to find a proper job. So my job offer with Foreign Affairs came at the same time as the PhD funding offer. And as a Christian child, I was like, if God brought both, who am I to despise either? So I started off registering for my PhD while working. When I realized that doing both was not going to work for me, I decided that if I excelled in terms of my PhD proposal being accepted, I'll then, leave the job, because I thought when I now have a PhD, I'm going to be a hot chick on the streets of academia and everyone will want to employ me. But such is not the case. Such is not the case. Such is not the case. So I think I was also struggling because I had someone who wanted to supervise me. And I've heard from so many people that your supervisor or your supervision can make or break your PhD journey. So I was thinking, what if in the future, when I now have money, I don't have a supervisor who is good enough? My potential PhD supervisor then was someone I'd worked with for my master's, so I already knew we could work together again, and we did, right? Another thing was that, remember the 15-year-old Primrose I told you about, who was dreaming so much about having a PhD? I had seen so many women within my mother's generation, including my mother herself, going back to school while mothering and while working. And I hated what that looked like, right? They were always stressed and struggling, committed to everything, but I never wanted to see myself experiencing so much fatigue. So I had made a personal commitment to myself that I would work so hard to make sure that by the time I started making certain decisions about my life that extend beyond me being single, I should have the PhD and I should have started my career. So in hindsight, yes, I mean, knowing that the job market is not stable or predictable, I should have done my PhD after working for so many years, but I don't think I regret it. Okay, question number 6 is, what advice do you have for graduate students and PhD candidates who are considering pursuing a career in academia? Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. So, I'm not against people doing their master's and PhD. Go for it, particularly if you've got funding, time, supervision, and if you want it, right? But I don't think that you should go into a PhD with the sole intention of using it to pursue a career in academia. Have multiple plans, plan A to Z if possible, and don't even make academia your plan A, B, and C. Let it happen by mistake, right? Or because you were just invited or the opportunity popped up, you applied and oh, well, you got it, right? Aim to work elsewhere. So I think that, for example, when you're doing your postgraduate studies, you're better off working off campus than working as a teaching assistant or a research assistant, particularly in the social sciences. I think, of course, there is value in working as a research assistant at the university if you're in the medical slash health sciences or anything that involves, practical work and equipment that is available at the university. Do that. If you're in humanities, have your short stint in teaching, or rather do like online teaching or tutoring in your spare time. But make sure that you are appearing in different platforms as a speaker, as a researcher, as a facilitator, and you are networking outside academia. because that will be helpful. The chances of getting a job in academia are very slim. I don't know what research says about those chances, and I don't even want to stress myself by doing it. But from personal experiences, I know that it is very hard. You can network within academia, but that doesn't guarantee you much. So the advice I've got for graduate students and anyone doing the PhD considering pursuing career in academia, don't do it. Question number 7. How important is networking in academia, and what strategies have you found effective for building professional connections? So networking in academia is very weird. It includes sometimes doing work for free, right? As a research assistant, as an editor, volunteering to teach, organizing events and workshops, as well as conferences within your institution. Also, being part of societies, organizations that host events in your field or area of study. Attending conferences and workshops is very important because these are sites of exchange of ideas and knowledge, meeting new people, expanding your networks beyond your own universities, which is very important, and joining relevant groups. So, for example, nowadays, people form working groups after conferences or workshops. People form working groups through WhatsApp groups where they will be sharing opportunities and ideas. Some people have got support networks through LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook communities. So just make sure that you are connected to people that want to pursue careers in academia or people that are already pursuing careers in academia at your university and across different universities in your country as well as globally. So yes, you might not want to be on social media, but you might just have to keep that Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn account on because you need to engage. You might just have to entertain being in WhatsApp groups because it's a postdoc forum or because people are sharing academic opportunities for jobs in your country or overseas. Also, this is very interesting. Make sure that you are good to students. I don't know who intentionally goes out there to be a bad teaching assistant, bad tutor, or bad lecturer, but students are part of your network. I've gotten gigs overseas because a student I taught when they were in South Africa recommended me to someone, right? I've also gotten jobs or worked with people because they were working with someone that I had taught. So it's very important to ensure that you are just networking in everything that you do, making great connections and not just going there, disseminating information, teaching, marking, hey, that's your work, and then that's it. Talk to people, engage with them, speak about your experiences, positive ones, negative ones, and also make sure that when you're in your undergraduate studies, postgraduate studies, you are also in contact with people you're with in class. What are they doing? What are you doing? Share that, You grow into friends. You don't have to be friends. You can just be intellectual friends, colleagues. Those peers are also helpful and part of your network because you can actually refer each other for opportunities, start something together, and, opportunities will be limitless in that way. So networking in academia involves everything that you do. Every moment that you're in, make sure that you are, exuding elements of networking and making sure that people know who you are and that they want to work with you, and that when something is mentioned, you're the first person they think about. So, question number 8 is, what are the key differences between academia and other career paths, and how did you navigate those differences? So, I've worked in government, I've worked in a faith-based organization, I've worked in a non-governmental organization, also a think tank. And what I can say is that government, government is very rigid. Bureaucracy is the key word. We all know about it. And whatever work you do as a researcher in government, someone sets the tone, someone sets the agenda. And for example, if you're in international relations, the foreign policy of the president of the day and what is being advised by his minister and other senior government officials determines to a large extent what you do. So there's very little room for creativity, although there are some points where you might bring up ideas or ways of doing things. But for the most part, everything is rigid. Growth levels are almost predetermined. To say, for example, if you work for 2 years, you become a senior. If you work for 3 years, you become a principal. And if you work for maybe like 6-7 years, you're eligible to be a deputy director, and so forth and so forth. I stand to be corrected because this might depend on the country context of where you are based and other factors that may have led to some people being promoted within a shorter time period. But generally, growth levels are predetermined, and this usually has nothing to do with your research output. So, for example, in academia, some people become senior lecturers because of the publications they have or the students they've graduated at master's and PhD level. And, government to a large extent has nothing to do with your understanding of theory and concepts, because you are mostly dealing with what is handed to you and working with it. And more often than not, we did not have working. And more often than not, theories are not involved. Also, what I liked about working in government in foreign affairs was there was potential to represent or lead, one day in a government department or in a international organization, because they like people who have worked at state or government level. However, income levels tend to be low. Flexibility when it comes to work hours is very low. To some extent, I think almost all your time is at the disposal of the state. And that means that on special days or when there are urgent matters, you may have just to go to the office even when you are on leave. So I didn't mind being in that space because I really loved it. Like, if anything, I wish I could keep my former job forever. But it just so happened that I couldn't do independent writing from within. And also, there was just a conflict of interest in terms of trying to be an academic thinker who brings multiple points of view, thinks about multiple case studies, and is a free thinker, as opposed to being in a space where you have to think in a particular way through the lens of your specific foreign policy. Faith-based organizations and NGOs tend to be very donor focused. And I hated that for the bigger part of my work, I was usually expected to write pity stories, to exaggerate problems, and to have this anti-government tone, because, of course, often you have to antagonize elements that will help you to get more funding if you antagonize them, right? Perhaps that was representative of the conditions in that specific country, but I did feel that there was very little room for growth and for me to experience feeling like I am fulfilled as a researcher, and feeling like I've done justice to the work that I was doing, and feeling like the research that I had done and engagements with people was going to be translated into helpful policies for the people first, before focusing on the funding interests, amongst other interests that these organizations had. And also, the NGO sector, uncertainty is high. Sometimes pay is actually low, and you get these short-term contracts. Sometimes you don't know when the next contract is going to come. So it's very difficult to be in those spaces, particularly if you're an early career researcher. I don't know how people that have been in this sector have done it for many years. It is just very difficult. And then when it comes to think tanks, I think what I like about them is that they're very output oriented, same as government. If you're going to be putting out weekly reports, daily reports, monthly reports, so you feel like you're working, and you are actually working, because there's a lot of research and writing that goes into your work. And I like that with think tanks, sometimes there was room to sort of not stick to one stream of thought, as opposed to government or maybe like the NGOs that were like following what they needed funding for. However, it was very difficult to work there because you don't often feel like you are going to have like a huge impact on policy, right? When you're working in government in a ministry, your work is going straight to parliamentary talking points. Your work is going straight to meeting speeches at high level spaces like intergovernmental organization summits. But now when you're a think tank, you feel like you are just spitting analysis on the news, spitting analysis in your reports, spitting analysis at events. But really, like, how often does government listen to them? I know that there are governments that do their research and listen to what various think tanks are saying, but sometimes it's very difficult. So I think that with being in a think tank in the long run, I would have just suffered from frustration. Income levels vary. Sometimes, the pay is lower than in academia, but most people argue that it's better to be in a think tank because you get to travel, you get to engage with multiple stakeholders from different facets of life. And, if you get a good job, you get to grow and maybe one day join the United Nations. Whew. Okay. I tend to speak fast sometimes. I just mentioned the United Nations. I've always wanted to work for the UN. I've never worked for them. So about being a researcher within the UN and being an academic in the UN, je ne sais pas. I don't know what happens there, and I wish I could know. I hope that I can come back here in at least 2 years' time and be telling you all the good stories about being in the United Nations. Moving on to question number 9. Have you ever experienced imposter syndrome in academia, and how did you address it? Yes. Yes. However you define imposter syndrome, if you don't know what it is, Google it. Whew. When it comes to teaching, I think I still am. There's usually I have this tendency of thinking, what if I miss certain points? I never got 100% in my academics. So obviously I'm not giving 100% to students, which is a very ridiculous thought. And sometimes I'm like, what if the students are ahead of me? I now feel the generational gap when I'm teaching people that were born in the 2000s and I'm busy like, I was born in 1992 and this is what I know. Because of course, they're more familiar with certain contemporary trends. But I think it's actually ideal not to know 100%, right? Because academics are supposed to be about sharing of knowledge and actually allowing intellectual thoughts to flow within a space and sharing of ideas, sharing of thoughts, sharing of case studies. So I think that it's just nonsense, me thinking I was never a 100% person. I don't know 100%. So what am I going to do? What helps is I share my vision whenever I start a class at the beginning of the semester, at the beginning of every session. I work through assignment questions with students to make sure that they are clear on what they need to do. And also, I really help with examination preps. I don't like giving students surprises. I'm not that type of teacher. Let someone, fail due to self-sabotage because you gave them the scope and everything and they decided not to do their work, or some form of confusion happened during the process. But I like providing enough guidance, right? And then when it comes to research, rejections heighten my levels of anxiety, right? Because when you submit work in academia for a journal submission or for a book chapter, it goes through 2 or 3 reviewers. And oftentimes, they're usually harsh in their responses or the tone when they are responding to your work. So it's very difficult, but I've just told myself that just submit, revise, submit. If you feel like the work isn't good enough, shelve it, try again, and no one will know. No one will know. I can come here and be like giving you YouTube videos every other week, but not telling you that I keep getting rejected, right? So eventually things will shape up and just work on it. Also, I think there's an importance in reevaluating yourself, because sometimes there's a reason why your work isn't getting accepted. What is the common thread, or why is your work getting so many rejections? Sometimes it has nothing to do with you. It has something to do with where you're submitting. It also has something to do with the resources you have in terms of the kind of research you can do. It also has something to do with maybe your theoretical grasp in terms of the concepts that you're trying to use. So you would have to try and work on different topics or work on using different concepts or theories to maybe making your work more acceptable and publishable. So you need to always think about your publication strategy. I do think that it's very important to have people that look at your work before you submit it elsewhere. That I have found helpful in most cases. In terms of research, sometimes I feel like an imposter because I am not very wealthy or well connected to certain people or spaces that can allow me to do research that I think is more prestigious than the kinds of topic that I pursue. But I think that is just a form of self-sabotage, and it's something I need to speak about and just erase from my mind and do what I can with what I have wherever I am. And then in terms of networking, sometimes I feel like I don't fit into spaces, but usually I feel like that because I've been made to feel that way, because generally I think I do have a high level of confidence that enables me to enter into spaces, introduce myself, listen to others, and also share my thoughts, opinions, and ideas. But when people squash me down, or when people are sexist or racist towards me or xenophobic towards me, I tend to really struggle to pick myself up and I forget that I'm a PhD. I start thinking about maybe it's because I'm small, maybe it's because I come from Zimbabwe, maybe it's because I'm a woman. Oh, and I'm also black. Yo. So really sometimes imposter syndrome does have to do with the word where it does really sometimes imposter syndrome has something to do with how you're received in some spaces or how you illuminate yourself or exaggerate that image to yourself. So I think I always remind myself that I've got a voice, that I've got knowledge, that I am learning, and that if I'm already in a space, I should continue to have the courage to stay on, to write, to speak, to present and exchange, as well as to teach. And at the end of the day, you might come to realize that people are actually winging it. Professors, in their 80s, in their 50s, young researchers, people that seem like they've got everything on point, that had distinctions all the way from undergraduate till the end of their studies. Many people are just winging it. So don't feel like you're an imposter in any space. Question number 10, the very last one. What are some of the time management and work-life balance challenges in academia, and how have you managed them? To be quite honest, I don't know about balance. I know that I try to be a human being who is not just an academic being, because when I've got deliverables, when I have to teach, when I have to research, I overcommit. I live by myself, and the only person I have to take care of in terms of like feeding, bathing, and transporting is me. So I have that space to actually just overcommit and do a lot and spend so many hours on my work, preparing to teach, going to teach, preparing to write, writing and submitting. So I do have what I call the tough weeks or the tough months where I'm just overexerting myself, immersed in the work that I need to be doing, which is a bad thing because it can lead to burnout. So I've not mastered the art of having a work-life balance. I do step out. I love taking walks. I love running. I love hiking. I love outdoor photography. And I love also attending events, whether academic, business related, church, and whatnot. And that really helps. However, I'm still struggling to also step out just to meet people and to step out just for like a social purpose that is not related to we have hiked, we have run, we have taken photos, we have worshipped. So, which is what I think is actually very vital. Like, go out for a braai, hang out with people somewhere, eat snacks. I don't know what people do in those social spaces, but I can't even say the word social spaces. So, I think I need to do that more. And then eating what I want when I want helps when I've got loads of research. This is not bad advice. I think because personally I struggle with eating. So actually when I feel like eating something, it's the opportune moment to just take those bananas, to just buy that pizza, to just munch onto that Nando's and call it food. And I do try to stay away from junk food. I try as much as I can to eat a lot of home cooked, home prepped meals, and eating what I want within that context, right? Because I think it actually helps to think about what does my appetite say, and when you eat what you like, it actually motivates you to work the way you want. And then self-pampering, I get myself gifts now that I actually do have money. When I was doing like my studies, I didn't have a lot of money, but whatever little money I got myself gifts that were within the confines of the budget that I had at the time. And then I do go home during the major holidays, for example, Easter and Christmas. Those should be non-negotiables. Time to be spent with loved ones, time to refresh, and time to just make sure that I am out of the space that is too familiar to me as an academic space. So that's really what I do. So I do think that the list of questions I had today regarding what I wish I knew before pursuing a career in academia is not exhaustive. However, I think that I need to do a chapter 2 or chapter 3. I mean, episode 2 or episode 3 of this topic at a later date, of course, to be advised. And like I said again, feel free to share in the comments what you may have from your end. I will end here today. And if you've not subscribed to the channel, I urge you to do so. I'm working towards having at least 1,000 subscribers by the end of October 2023 with the aim of growing this channel further. So thank you so much for watching until the end. Remember also to share this content and like. Bye.